3 nights before Jodi Sanderholm disappeared, her best friend was followed home by a stranger in a pale blue car. She circled the block to be sure. She drove to the police station and parked beside it, just in case. And when the car finally slipped away into the dark, she told herself it was nothing, a prank, a coincidence, someone else's bad night. It wasn't. The man behind the wheel had been watching Jodi since she was a child. And on the morning of January 5th, 2007, in a Kansas town where everyone believed nothing bad could happen, he stopped watching and acted. Jodi Leanne Sanderholm was 19 years old, and by every account, she was the kind of daughter who always called back. She was born in the fall of 1987 in Arkansas City, Kansas, a quiet place of about 12,000 people near the Oklahoma line, the youngest of 3, with an older brother and sister, and 2 parents, Brian and Cindy, who believed they'd raised their children somewhere safe. She was, by any measure, exceptional, one of 4 valedictorians in her graduating class, a state scholar, named her school's outstanding physics student of the year. But the thing that defined Jodi wasn't the transcript, it was dance. She'd spent 4 years on her high school dance team, 2 of them as captain. She taught younger dancers herself. And when she enrolled at Cowley College to study pre-pharmacy, she joined the Tigerettes, the college dance line, and kept choreographing routines for anyone who asked. On Friday, January 5th, 2007, Jodi drove her silver Dodge Stratus to campus for a morning rehearsal scheduled to end at 10:45. She had a full day ahead of her, an appointment at noon, and that evening, a performance at a basketball game, a halftime routine she had choreographed herself. There was simply no version of that Friday where Jodi Sanderholm didn't come home. But that afternoon, her mother came home instead. Cindy had a bad feeling she couldn't explain, and she left work early to check on her daughter. Jodi's car wasn't in the driveway. Inside, the house was exactly as it had been that morning. Her dance uniform wasn't in the washing machine where she always put it. The shower was dry, and Jodi always showered after rehearsal. She hadn't been home at all. By 6 o'clock that evening, after calling every friend and turning up nothing, Brian and Cindy Sanderholm called the police and reported their 19-year-old daughter missing. The response was immediate. Deputies printed flyers, put out an alert on Jodi's car, and began tracing her last known movements. Her boyfriend, whom she'd dated since high school, was ruled out almost at once. He'd been at his brother's place in Texas for days, and it checked out. Then Jodi's phone gave them a direction. The last signal it sent had pinged off a cell tower near the Caw Wildlife area, a vast stretch of woods and water along the Arkansas River, southeast of town. If Jodi was out there, she was somewhere enormous and cold and very dark. Her car was the problem they thought they could solve first. A car is hard to hide. They put a fixed-wing aircraft in the air over the fields and tree lines, hoping to catch the shape of a silver Stratus from above. They found nothing. What they found instead was on the ground, and it was worse. Along the shore of a nearby fishing lake, searchers began pulling Jodi's belongings out of hiding, piece by piece. Her dance shoes, mail addressed to her parents stuffed into a chemical toilet, a wallet holding her driver's license and her social security card, her leotard. A jacket with her name stitched across the front. Someone had scattered the pieces of a 19-year-old's life around the edge of that lake and walked away. On January 9th, 4 days after she vanished, a sonar team surveying the bottom of the lake found her sunken car. And that same day, the last hope her family had been holding onto ended. Jodi's body was found nearby, in a wooded preserve, hidden beneath a pile of leaves and branches. She had been strangled. The medical examiner would later testify that her final hours were violent and prolonged, that her injuries told the story of someone who fought hard to live. Out of respect for Jodi, the full findings don't need to be repeated here. It is enough to say that what was done to her in those woods was as cruel as anything that county had ever seen. The investigation didn't start from zero. Within 24 hours, the same name kept surfacing, and it came from the people who knew Jodi best. Her best friend, Lori, told detectives about the previous Tuesday night. Leaving her job at a local restaurant, she'd noticed a pale blue car circling. On the drive home, it fell in behind her. She turned down random streets to test it, and the car turned with her every time. Frightened, She drove to the police station and parked beside it until the car finally disappeared. She told herself it was a prank. She never filed a report. Then on the morning Jodi disappeared, Lori saw that same pale blue car sitting in the college parking lot. This time she recognized the driver, a 23-year-old local man named Justin Thurber. And as detectives asked around, more dancers came forward with the same account. They had all seen Thurber that week, parked near the campus, just sitting in his car watching them practice. Thurber was already well known to police, with a string of prior arrests behind him: theft, drug possession, disorderly conduct, and just 6 days before Jodi vanished. He'd been arrested again and bilaid out. But the detail that turned the investigators cold came from his own ex-girlfriend. She told them Thurber had once confided that he'd been watching Jodi since he was 13 years old, that he used to spy on her through windows. His fixation on Jodi Sanderholm was not new. It had never stopped. When officers first spoke to Thurber the day after Jodi disappeared, he offered an elaborate story. A day spent driving the countryside with friends, a car that got stuck. A 30-mile walk home in the cold that ended with his father collecting him, wet and filthy, near that very lake. His father confirmed the pickup, but every friend Thurber named would later deny the story outright. None of them had been with him that day. The alibi was invented from start to finish. Once Thurber was in custody, the physical evidence began to close around him, and it reconstructed the crime almost minute by minute. The security cameras at the college told the first part. The footage showed Thurber's pale blue car in the lot during rehearsal, and it showed him pulling out at the exact moment Jodi did, falling in behind her, following her out. Investigators believe he followed her the whole way home. When Jodi stopped at her family's mailbox to collect the mail, the same mail later found dumped beside the lake, he attacked her there, forced her into her own car, and drove her away. What convinced them was a single shoe print pressed into the ground beside the Sanderholm mailbox, matching the sole of Thurber's sneaker exactly. Out in the wildlife area, trackers found 2 sets of footprints running side by side, Thurber's, and a smaller set matching Jodi's shoes. They followed them together until Jodi's footprints simply stopped. From that point on, only Thurber's prints continued, sinking deeper with each step, on into the trees, toward the place her body was found. He had carried her the rest of the way. Then came the DNA. A single short hair recovered from the driver's seat of Jodi's flooded car was tested and matched to Thurber. Cell tower records placed his phone in the same locations as Jodi's throughout that entire day. And samples taken from her body could not exclude him, while excluding 99% of everyone else on Earth. Piece by piece, the fabricated alibi collapsed, and what remained was a single straight line, running from a college parking lot to a shallow grave in the woods. Justin Thurber was charged with capital murder. His attorneys argued that he was intellectually disabled and unfit to stand trial, but he had graduated high school and attended college, and the court rejected the claim. At trial, the prosecution didn't only present the forensics. They put Thurber's pattern on the stand. His ex-girlfriend testified. So did 6 other women, 6, each describing how Thurber had stalked them. One co-worker had needed a police escort just to reach her own car after dark, because he was waiting for her in the parking lot. He had once left a rose on her windshield with a note. What happened to Jodi, the jury came to understand, was not a sudden loss of control. It was the endpoint of a lifetime of escalation that everyone had seen and no one had been able to stop. On February 17, 2009, the jury found Justin Thurber guilty on every count and recommended a sentence of death. He was sentenced accordingly. But Jodi's death changed more than one man's fate. In 2008, Kansas passed a law in her name, Jodi's Law, expanding what the state could legally treat as stalking, and giving police the authority to act on it before it turns fatal. That law exists because the warnings in Jodi's case had been everywhere. A friend followed in the dark. A man parked outside a dance practice. A fixation stretching back years, and no one had the tools to stop it in time. And yet, for her family, justice has never fully arrived. Kansas has not carried out an execution since 1965. Thurber's appeals have stretched across more than a decade. cycling through questions of competency and DNA that reopen the wound each time. He remains on death row alive in a maximum security prison. Jodi's mother, Cindy, spent the rest of her life fighting for his sentence to be carried out. She died in December of 2022, still waiting. Jodi Sanderholm was 19 years old, a daughter, a sister, a valedictorian, a dancer who never missed a call. The signs that she was in danger had been seen by almost everyone around her, and understood by all of them too late. If her story leaves us with a single warning, let it be that one. When someone tells you they are being followed, believe them the first time.